and welcome to How to Build Dark Elf Armies. Today I'm going to go over how to build every single army for the Dark Elves from the early game right up to the late game. First up, the strengths of the Dark Elf armies. They have a good mix of a few powerful infantry units and cav, along with some great monsters. They are a very offensive focused roster, with high damage being prioritized over defense in almost every single unit. And finally, they have very strong early game ranged units with armor piercing and the multi-ammo type artillery. As for their weaknesses, they do have a lower range on most units compared to similar units from other factions. Their top tier troops also lack any ranged defense, so rely entirely on armor and your other units taking them out. And everything that isn't ranged in the early game is pretty bad, particularly their cav, which couldn't charge through a sheet of paper if they needed to. First up, we have our early game composition. For this, we have access to tier 0 units. These are the Sword and Shield Dreadlord, the Sword and Crossbow Dreadlord, High Beast Masters, Supreme Sorceresses of Shadows, Dark, Fire, Beasts and Death, and Dread Spears. In tier 1, we have access to Bleak Swords and Dark Shards. I choose to lead my armies with the Supreme Sorceresses of Fire. You're best off going with a Caster Lord since they can get on a Dragon Mount, whereas your Caster Heroes cannot. This means eventually they will have both spell power and battling damage, which makes them the clear choice. And of course, Fire is the best law of magic if you ask me, so it's really a no-brainer. Pick up the Burning Head as soon as possible and carry your early game battles. For the front lines, we're going with 4 Dread Spears and 6 Bleak Swords. Due to the lack of other choices in the front line, it is a rather boring mix. Spears go on the outside to protect the flanks from any cav or large targets. Bleak Swords go in the middle to do the majority of front lines battling. Yes, the damage isn't brilliant, but it's slightly better than the spears, and they can hold their ground long enough for your caster and ranged troops to do all the work. For the rest of the army, we're going with 9 Dark Shards. They have shorter range, but higher damage than most early game crossbow infantry, but do need to get a good angle and get close to enemies than you might like, but the damage output will certainly be worth it. For the strengths of this army, first of all, it's obviously extremely simple to put together. The Firecaster also gets a ton of value early on, with their powerful spells working best versus early game and less armored units, so chuck a few points into the Burning Head and carry your battles. Dark Shards are also one of the highest damage early game ranged units due to their armor piercing damage, so you'll be able to take on units that are quite a bit tougher than yours. And finally, all the front lines units are shielded, so they'll be relatively defended from ranged fire. The weaknesses, however, the frontline damage is super low, so if you lose your Lord and ranged units, they will not do much to contribute to the battle. The Lord is also terrible in melee combat, so enemy Lords and heroes will prove challenging until he can get something that can take them on. Finally, Dark Shards have that shorter range than a lot of other ranged units, so positioning them can be a lot harder and a lot more dangerous. Coming to the mid game now, we have access to tier 2 units. This is Shielded Dark Shards, Masters, Dark Riders, Dark Rider Repeater Crossbows, Shades, and Witch Elves. We also have tier 3 units, Reaper Bolt Throwers, Sisters of Slaughter, Black Ark Corsairs, Black Ark Corsair Handbows, Doomfire Warlocks, Shielded Dark Riders, Dual Weapon Shades, Great Sword Shades, Death Hags, Canine Assassins, Harpies, Scourge Runner Chariots, Bloodrank Medusas, and Sorceresses. We're of course keeping the Supreme Sorceress of Fire, should have a few more spells online by now, and be continuing to provide value. As the enemy become more armored, you'll want to spec into the later spells to cut through. We're also going to pick up a Death Hag. This brings some character presence to your front lines, and also comes with some nice effects for debuffing enemy units and taking some out in duels. We're dropping down to 2 Dread Spears to make room for other units. Unfortunately, no other better spear units at this stage, otherwise all of them would be gone. We're picking up 4 Black Ark Corsairs to replace our Bleak Swords, since these lads have way higher armor and better damage, so it's really a no-brainer. For our ranged infantry, we're going with 6 Great Sword Shades. They are the best ranged units in the Dark Elves and one of the best ranged units in the game, since they do great damage from a range and can actually do a lot of work in melee too. Don't be afraid to send them in once they burn through their ammo. We're picking up 2 Bloodrank Medusas, which are brilliant ranged monsters with exceptionally high damage that is best suited for single targets. They also do great work in melee combat, so they really can do it all. We're going to go with 2 Doomfire Warlocks, nice utility cav that come with magical attacks, as well as a couple of bounce spells to bring value outside their standard combat. Use their spells on cooldown if possible, and send them back to do work against anything with resistance to make the most of that magic. If not, charges back to the front lines. Finally, we're going with 2 Reaper Bolt Throwers that are a brilliant multi-ammo type infantry. Stick it on a single shot for taking out your large targets, and multi-shot for your infantry, and just keep them firing and switching to the appropriate ammo, and they will do great work. Strengths of this composition, there is a lot of ranged firepower to take on all kinds of units. Most of the ranged units can also do work in melee, so you don't really have to worry as hard about keeping them defended. It's also a much tougher front line than before, with the Corsairs and Death Hag backing them up. For the weaknesses, however, we're still keeping the crappy Spears units, so the anti-large damage on the front lines is still a little bit lacking. If all of your ranged units also get pinned down, they will lose a large amount of their damage potential, even if they might not be doing too badly. Also, you don't have the most units in the world to take out the enemy back lines, so you're going to have to work real hard with the ones you do have, or face the hail of missiles. Finally, we come to our late game composition. We have tier 4 units, Haganeth Executioners, Feral Manticores, Charybdises, War Hydras, Cold One Knights, Black Guard of Nagarond, and Cold One Chariots. And finally, tier 5 units, Black Dragons, Cold One Dread Knights, and Bloodwrack Shrines. For the late game composition, we're of course still sticking with our Supreme Sorceress of Fire. She should be on a Dragon dragon mount by now and have all the spells, so I'll be able to provide value on the front lines as well as that juicy Law of Fire spell utility. The Death Axe should be on her shrine mount to provide all sorts of auras and abilities to assist in the front lines. This might make her into a bigger hitbox, but the buffs are definitely worth the size increase. Going to swap out the spears for the Blackguard of Nagarond, finally upgrading to these top tier anti-large units. They have great armor piercing damage with the bonus versus large as well as that charge immunity. The only downside, the lack of shields. I'm going to switch out the Corsairs to Hagenef Executioners, which are a high damage armor piercing greatswords unit. They slaughter versus most enemy infantry, and though they don't have the most defense in the world and tend to be a little squishy, if you back them up and support them with missiles and monsters, you'll be able to wipe out the enemy before they take too many hits. We're sticking with the same 6 greatsword shades and swapping our Bloodwrack Medusas for 2 Bloodwrack Shrines. They'll lose a little bit of their damage output, but gain a bunch of auras to assist nearby units. This means you want to place them further up near your front lines to keep them defended and firing, and they'll do just fine. Going to bring 1 War Hydra and 1 Charybdis. The War Hydra is a brilliant giant monster for obliterating enemy infantry blobs with the fire breath and large area attacks. Send them into the front lines and watch them go to work. Just make sure to keep them safe from ranged units since they are such large targets. The Charybdis is similar to the Hydra but specializes in anti-large damage. If the enemy has anything large, then send this chap in and he'll do some great work. And again, keep him safe from ranged since he's such a large target. Finally, closing us out, we have the 2x Reaper Bolt Throwers, which are the same as before. Strengths of this army, we still have a lot of powerful ranged units for taking on all kinds of enemy units. We've now also taken on a lot of powerful monsters to again take on all kinds of enemy units. We have brilliant characters that offer plenty of utility and value, both with themselves in combat and their ability to assist the rest of the army. As for the weaknesses, not much you can do to enemy backline units, so you have to focus them down with the Lord and the mount and spells, or some of your ranged units like your artillery. We also have a fair few large targets, so the enemy will have an easy time aiming at them and bursting them down if you're not careful. Also, none of your frontline units have shields, so enemy ranged units have free reign to fire at them and only meet armor as resistance. To close you out and show you this battle in action, I'll pass you over to live commentary Miles. Take it away. Thank you for that, Miles. So everyone, as we can see, I'm of course going against Empire. They've got a delightful mix of front lines units, ranged units, a couple of artillery, but a wonderful Hunts Marshal Lord and a General of the Empire somewhere. Empire Captain, sorry, there he is, and they have a bunch of cavs. So this should be a real test to see if I can keep all of my ranged units safe. We're of course going to be targeting those cavalry units right out the gate because they are, well, the largest threat to my army, to be completely frank with you guys. So I'm using my Reaper Bolt Throwers on, of course, the anti-large ammo mode to take them out as quickly as possible. I'm now halting my shades and going to get them starting firing as soon as possible because the enemy is now moving into range of me. I'm also going to pause the Bloodwrack Shrine. They are going to start focusing down the Temple Hoff Luminarch, the Luminarch of Ice unit. Yeah, we're going to start focusing that down. The Charybdis trying to make a move to catch up to these cavalry units, but unfortunately is just not fast enough. But the Bloodwrack Shrine is, of course, there to provide auras as well as some ranged power. As you can see over here, the lines are starting to clash and the enemy is charging into my side, going in on the... It looks like they were going on the War Hydra, but it's now looking like they're going to go in on my Bloodwrack Shrine and, of course, my poor undefended greatswords. A good thing about the shades, however, they have brilliant armor-piercing missile damage, so I'm just going to target a few of these guys onto those to try and keep my artillery safe. There we go, we've managed to root off 2 units of the Demogryph Halberds, despite them having great... Oh wait, these aren't Demogryph Halberds. I swear they had some. Those ones are, and so are those. So the only ones that are left are ironically the ones that don't have any anti-large damage. So as you can see on the front lines, my Hagenef Executioners are doing very well against the Empire Greatswords. Yes, taking a little bit of damage, but with the Greatsword there, providing all the buffs that she does, especially when she's buffed with that Witch Brew ability, she's not doing too bad at all. Of course, the enemy ranged units are starting to tear me to pieces, so I'm going to need to start focusing them down as quickly as possible. I'm now moving my Supreme Sorceress of Fire on that Dragon Mount into the back lines to help take out these Demogryph Knights because they have managed to root my Reaper Bolt Throwers. But with that much HP, I think they'll be coming back relatively soon. This other unit here now making a move again with halberds, but unfortunately I have 3 units of Greatsword Shades and my Lord is on a Dragon, so I'm really not too worried. On the left-hand side here, we can see another charge has come in. The Bloodwrack Shrine and the Charybdis still just sort of stood there. I think the Charybdis is trying to get in, but is now body blocked by the Bloodwrack Shrine. How inconvenient is that? Because he could be doing so much anti-large damage to these boys. The War Hydra there in the middle of the Great Swords, absolutely tearing the thing up, barely taking any damage. I really don't know why this Luminarch of Hyge and this Steam Tank aren't completely focusing this thing down, because goddamn, look at the size of those hitboxes. Instead, they're deciding to focus on my front lines for whatever reason. As you can see, in the middle of the front lines here, a lot of their units have broken. I really should be moving them up, but you know I'm terrible at micro, so I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to wait a minute and then I'll send them up when I'm good and ready. I'm starting to move my other shades here now on the right-hand flank to fire into the enemy sides, backs, and just any area where I can shoot them, to be honest with you folks, because as long as they're shooting, they're doing good work. There we go. My Reaper Bolt Throwers are now returning to their artillery pieces, and they will resume firing momentarily. This Reaper Bolt Thrower, for some reason, has got a movement order over here. That must have been a bit of a misclick from myself to try and right-click them to target something. The Charybdis is now stood in the middle of nowhere again and has now been targeted on the Luminac of Hysh, so he'll be moving in to take that out shortly. The War Hydra is now moving up along with the majority of the middle of my front lines, which have moved up and are going to be taking on this Luminac of Hysh and chasing down any that remain of the enemy ranged units. This unit of Demogryph Knights Halberds just does not know when to give up. They've only got 8 entities left. They are not going to be able to greet. They're not going to be able to beat Great Sword Shades, especially when the Black Guard of Nagarond are right there to provide support. And as you can see, with that charge, they are just shattering their leadership and they will fall very, very quickly indeed. This Bloodwrack Shrine has decided to be a good idea to chase off these Demogryph Knight Halberds. Should have probably put them on guard mode, but you know what? We make mistakes here, folks, and then I tell you how not to do them. So it's all a learning experience. It's very, very useful. As you can see, most of the enemy army is now starting to break. This unit, this Empire Captain, sorry, is terrified of the Charybdis, the Supreme Sorceress of Fire, sorry, and looking at this thing, I can totally understand why. There we go. That's one of the Luminacs of Hysh has been completely taken out. It's going to fall very, very soon. And there we go. It has been destroyed. And the Charybdis is taking on the other one and is, of course, absolutely trouncing it because these things are really not built for attack in melee combat. And against the Charybdis, they're really not going to do too well. The enemy ranged units here are about to be hit by a beautiful Burning Head, if I do say so myself. Oh, that spell is wonderful. Look at it go. I didn't quite catch the Gunderman Surefires, and I did semi-catch, some Haganef Executioners, but you know what? I'm sure they'll be fine. Come on, guys, get up. Guys? Yep, they're fine. They're just a bit toasty, okay? Warm up, but it's snowy out here. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. And if I'm not mistaken, that does spell army losses. We just managed to take that many of them out that it didn't really matter how much friendly fire I did. All we have to do now is take out the meme tank, and the Hydra is already in position and will be getting backed up soon by literally everything. As you can see there, just done a classic old Control-A and right-click on the meme tank. So things could have done better in this battle. Probably defended my backlines a little bit more, but this was an exceptionally heavy, exceptionally cav-heavy army. For the AI to randomly jumble up. What I do, I refresh the army until I get a generic lord, and then as long as the army looks relatively okay, I just kind of post it so I'm not going against any legendary lords, because that wouldn't really be fair since I'm not using them. So yes, other things I could have done well. Probably not cast as many spells on my front lines, support them, microed them a lot more. A lot of the time they were stood there not really doing anything, and that is of course on me. You know, I do make mistakes in this example. I'm not going to pretend I don't, and that I purposely leave them in so that we can all have a delightful learning experience from it. So yes, let's take out this meme tank very quickly. Let's move on to the stats. So as we can see here, starting with the Supreme Sorceress of Fire, she's picked up 46 kills and nearly 10,000 damage and over 2,000 damage value, so definitely paying for herself there. The Lore of Fire is just such a fantastic lore. Even when you get into the late game and it's not as effective versus more armored targets, it still burns them up and makes them scared and crumbles their leadership. And if you can get a cast on the back lines where they aren't armored, then they will melt just as quickly as they did at the start. Of course, when she's on that Dragon Mount, she of course gets a ton more value from the breath and the combat, and just everything about that combo is just beautiful. As for the Death Hag, she was in the front lines with 85 kills, not as much damage value, but still 7,500 nearly damage dealt, which is extremely, extremely respectable. She's basically just there to get into the front lines, do a bit of punishment, and dish out as many auras as she possibly can to buff all of these front lines units into doing even more work. And as we can see, they have certainly put in some work. 67, 110, and 116, 115 kills, then 80 and 63 in the Black Guard of Nagarond. Yes, these Haganef Executioners, they do tend to be very squishy and go down in health very rapidly when they're in combat, but boy oh boy do they take the enemy with them. And as long as you don't mind standing around a little bit to get some replenishment, it's really not the end of the world. The Black Guard of Nagarond are a fantastic anti-large unit. The only downside of these two units is the no shield, so when the enemy is firing at them, they really can't do anything apart from sit there and take it and hope that their armor is thick enough. As you can see in the shades here, not the most kills on them, but the damage value isn't too bad. 1,500 there, 1,000 there, 1,200 there, and another 1,600. Is that the exact same? Wow, what are the chances? Very interesting indeed. But yes, these great sword shades, they were dishing out a ton of armor-piercing damage. I think it just so happens that they soften them up, and then the Haganef Executioners tended to get the final blow there, so that would explain why the kills are so low. And also, a lot of these guys were focusing down your less entity-based units. So they were focusing down a lot of the Cav, as well as the Luminacs of Hysh. They were doing a lot of focus fire in there to whittle them down with that fantastic armor-piercing damage. And of course, when they got charged, they didn't take too much damage. They're all about half HP here and stood their ground very respectably against units that, to be honest, would beat most of the ranged units. As you can see, the War Hydra going in to that big clump of the Great Swords, getting 7,200 damage and 1,300 damage value with 56 kills. Yes, there wasn't the biggest clump in the world, and we could certainly have got much more value if there were a lot more balled up and he could get a fantastic fire breath into them all, but definitely a respectable amount of damage there. As for the Charybdis, nearly 2,000 damage value, he was of course fighting much higher value targets than the War Hydra, higher value just in terms of their actual value and how much they cost. The War Hydra going against large targets really just makes them fantastic at just blocking cav charges and absorbing them and doing a ton of damage, or going against enemy giant units, or going against anything that's large at all. The Luminax of Hysh are a great example of that, because even though in the artillery they still count as large targets, and the bonus really does help them. As for the Reaper Bolt Throwers, unfortunately, these guys are a little bit of an early game artillery unit. You could probably get rid of them, but I just love to have some artillery in my army to force the enemy to come to me if I don't want to go to them. Because if you don't, the enemy will just pretty much just sit there waiting for you to attack them. But if you outrange them and can start firing upon them, then they will eventually come to you. But yes, not the most damage value, 500 and 700 there, but about 5,000 damage between them, certainly not too bad. And with that multi-ammo type, you can fire whatever you want to fire at and they're going to do well. As for the Bloodrack Medusas, again, not the most damage value here, but these guys are mostly there for the auras and the ranged support. Unfortunately, though, it seemed they got charged down quite quickly, so didn't get much chance to do a lot of ranged supporting, and most ended up dishing out their auras to the units that were defending them. Okay, I believe that wraps everything up on how to build armies for the Dark Elves. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then please do be sure to leave it a like. It really does help out a lot. If you want to see more videos like this on Warhammer 2, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, because I have new videos coming out every single week. I'd like to take this time to thank all supporters of the channel, both here on YouTube as well as on Twitch and Patreon. In particular, I'd like to thank Kobe Said So, Nifty Norm for their fantastic support at the Unclean Ones tier. One more time, thank you so very much for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.